Fuddruckers. Now there's an amusing name to pronounce. This formerly thriving burger restaurant has experienced quite the turbulent journey. I'm going to explore their various highs and lows, but first, let me show you just how much they've been declining. At their peak, they operated over 200 establishments. Texas always represented their strongest region, though they had expanded in nearly every state nationwide. Fast forward to today, and they've shrunk to fewer than 100 locations across just 23 states. That's roughly a 50% reduction in their footprint, which means there's a strong likelihood the Fuddruckers you used to visit has shut its doors recently. More proof of their difficulties. They declared bankruptcy back in 2010, and then approximately 10 years after that, in 2020, they nearly closed permanently until a purchaser emerged who wanted to rescue the company. This has been quite the eventful saga. Fuddruckers has changed hands 8 times throughout their 40-plus-year existence. So I believe the ideal approach to showcase their journey would be examining all 8 ownership changes and discussing the major developments during each period. Phil Romano, 1980. Let's begin in 1980 with founder Phil Romano himself. He completed his degree at Florida Atlantic University, FAU, during the 1960s and immediately dove into restaurant management and even ownership of multiple establishments. During the 1970s, he relocated to Texas to continue chasing those entrepreneurial dreams, and by 1980, he had developed an exciting idea for a fresh restaurant model. His concept centered on the notion that customers would willingly spend more for a burger offering superior quality compared to typical fast food establishments, without quite reaching the full-service casual dining level. Keep in mind, this predated Chipotle, Panera, and the entire fast casual revolution, so these were innovative concepts at the time. In his own words, "I thought the world needed a better hamburger." And if you're familiar with Fuddruckers today, you know they're extremely proud of their burgers. In fact, get this, they claim to serve the world's greatest hamburgers. That's not my personal assessment. It's a declaration the company has been broadcasting continuously since the 1980s. You'll find it everywhere. Their website, their signage, their logo. Yes, that's certainly a confident statement. It always makes me think of that scene where Buddy the Elf discovers the world's best cup of coffee. But I must acknowledge, they do seem to invest considerable effort into their burgers. So Phil Romano purchased an abandoned bank building in San Antonio, Texas, and transformed it into a restaurant selling the world's greatest hamburgers, or at minimum, a higher quality burger compared to most fast food chains. The original name? I love this. He called it Freddy Fuddruckers. He obviously dropped Freddy pretty quickly, but can you imagine someone actually being named Freddy Fuddruckers? That would be amazing. To clarify, it was never anyone's real name. Some rumors suggest it was inspired by a fictional airline called Fuddrucker, but I believe more than anything, it's simply a quirky name designed to grab people's attention. Roughly 18 months later, Romano launched the second Fuddruckers in Houston, Texas, and approximately 18 months after that, they experienced their first ownership transition. Quick favor before we dive deeper. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the company's documentary, smash that like button and subscribe. Public stock offering, 1983. In 1983, they conducted a public stock offering that generated the capital needed to begin opening many additional restaurants. I should mention that Phil Romano did retain majority ownership, but this marked the beginning of him gradually distancing himself from the company. In 1985, he resigned from a CEO role, and by that decade's end, he departed the board of directors and sold most of his shares in order to move forward with launching new restaurant concepts. The most notable of these was probably Romano's Macaroni Grill, which you might recognize from its dozens of locations across America. Back to Fuddruckers. They were now becoming a recognized brand because they had the resources to open new restaurants in new markets. But perhaps even more significantly, they were implementing a franchising model. That's essentially where others pay them for the privilege to operate locations using their brand and their food. All these factors helped Fuddruckers expand to over 100 locations within the following 4 years, which might have been slightly aggressive. I consider that their first misstep. They were overextended and began losing money, but they reduced some staff and sold certain company-operated locations to franchisees, and that created enough breathing room to reverse the downward trend. Dhaka International Merger, 1988. Their next ownership change occurred in 1988 when they merged with a company named DACA International. This company specialized in food service contracts. Specifically, they were among the nation's largest cafeteria operators, with locations in places like universities and hospitals. The two seemed compatible because combining would increase their efficiency regarding food purchasing and certain operations. One of Fuddruckers' main attractions has always been their toppings bar. Similar to cafeteria-style service, they give you a plain burger, and then you bring it to that area and add whatever toppings you desire. It's an enjoyable approach that gives customers more control over exactly what they're eating, and it reduces costs because there's never been a requirement to hire servers. DACA controlled Fuddruckers for nearly 10 years, and during that period, the brand gained significantly more recognition, almost doubling in size and approaching 200 locations. In fact, during the mid-1990s, there were a dozen Home Depot stores that featured a smaller version of Fuddruckers called Fuddruckers Express inside them. They didn't survive long because the entire concept proved to be a failure. Actually, everything for Fuddruckers started deteriorating around that time frame. Part of it was a similar problem. They were launching locations too rapidly, leading them to make poor real estate decisions. But also, they believed there was customer confusion regarding Fuddruckers' core concept of the world's greatest hamburger. Let me elaborate on that. I'd argue that the strongest case that can be made for these genuinely being the world's greatest hamburgers is their remarkable freshness. I mean, objectively, I don't believe you can create a hamburger much fresher than this. Dating back to the very first burgers at that initial location, they've been recognized for having an area labeled butcher shop and an area labeled bakery, not to mention the toppings bar. I think Phil Romano understood that if you're going to make such a bold declaration, you need to support it with tangible evidence. So with all of this visible, people could observe that the meat was cut and ground daily at the restaurants, that the buns were baked from scratch daily at the restaurants, and that all the vegetables were clearly fresh. But by the mid-1990s, they stopped highlighting all of these elements, partly by redesigning the restaurant layout. So suddenly, the world's greatest burger began appearing more like an hollow promise. Additionally, investors worried that DACA was having their focus divided in too many directions, given that they also own the cafeteria business and two other restaurant chains named Cheeseburger and Paradise and Great Bagel and Coffee. Unique Casual Restaurants, 1997. The next ownership change is a very short, technical transition. In 1997, DACA International essentially divided. They sold their cafeteria operations and separated their restaurants into a newly established company called Unique Casual Restaurants. Michael Cannon's King Cannon, 1998. But by the next year, there was already another change. In 1998, Fuddruckers was purchased by King Cannon, which was a private company owned by a prominent figure in the restaurant industry named Michael Cannon. The amount he paid was $43 million, and he was prepared to invest additional funds to try and shake things up and breathe new life into the brand. He introduced this rock and roll theme that was rapidly adopted by all the company-owned restaurants. There were updates and renovations. He broadened the menu offerings, all things that did help attract attention to the brand. But by 2010, things had declined significantly once more. Being a private company during this entire period makes it difficult to identify exactly where things went wrong, but I have to suspect that reduced sales from the recession would probably be a major contributor, especially considering that Fuddruckers has always been the more expensive, premium option compared to the more popular, cheaper fast food restaurants. I'm just saying, when finances are tight and you're craving a hamburger, you're more inclined to visit a place like McDonald's than a place like Fuddruckers. That's when they filed for bankruptcy, an event that rapidly led to 2 additional ownership changes. Travis Stock, 2010. Straight out of that bankruptcy, their assets were purchased for $40 million by a private equity firm called Travis Stock. Again, not among the most significant changes on this list, because roughly a month later, those assets were resold. Luby's, 2010. This time for $61 million, and the new owner was another popular chain called Luby's. That, I have to admit, seemed like another promising match. Interestingly enough, Luby's is recognized for their cafeteria-style food. I know they keep returning to that theme. They were also established in San Antonio, with their largest market still being Texas, and they had somewhat of a different customer demographic. Luby's is more traditional and targeted toward adults, but Fuddruckers has, for quite some time, found success by appealing to families and children. Going back to 1990, they had a brilliant idea by launching this promotion where kids could eat for free Monday through Thursday after 4 p.m. Those were the hours when they were experiencing difficulty attracting customers. And it was successful. They even provided things like balloons and video games. The specifics differ depending on the location, but Fuddruckers developed this reputation of being an entertaining place for children. So that motivated Lubies to experiment with these dual-concept locations, with the concept being that adults would want to visit Lubies while kids would want to visit Fuddruckers. So that building would be like getting the best of both worlds. There was an ambitious vision in merging these two companies together that, once again, regrettably, it never truly materialized the way many had anticipated. Lubies was already dealing with declining sales and substantial debt before they spent the $60 million to acquire Fuddruckers, and then they spent another $11 million to purchase Cheeseburger in Paradise, effectively merging three restaurant chains that were experiencing difficulties. Most of the Cheeseburger in Paradise locations were swiftly closed or converted into Fuddruckers. By 2018, same-store sales were consistently falling across the board, motivating them to shut down locations along the way. We can attribute it to the expected synergies not proving to be all that synergistic. We can attribute it to cafeteria-style restaurants in general declining because they were no longer favored by customers. Or we can attribute it to the multiple chains still being weighed down by financial and operational problems dating back years earlier. And all of that was occurring before the pandemic. I don't need to tell you that it amplified all of their problems, and by mid-2020, major transformations needed to occur. That's when it appeared like it could have been the conclusion of Fuddruckers. Black Titan Franchise Systems, 2021. But in 2021, they did discover a buyer willing to attempt to rescue the brand. Back to the list. The new owner is Black Titan Franchise Systems, a franchisee of theirs that is owned by Nicholas Perkins. For $18.5 million, he assumed control of the remaining 92 Fuddruckers locations. It was actually a transaction that made him the first African-American with 100% ownership of a national burger franchise. It does appear to be at least somewhat personally driven, but he states he believes in the strength of the franchisees and that he has ambitious plans to stabilize the brand, reposition it, and eventually make it grow again. So it's not necessarily the end of Fuddruckers just yet. Anyway, though, they have been somewhat circling the drain for quite a while. Closing thoughts. Let me know in the comments. What do you envision for the future of Fuddruckers? You wouldn't expect that the restaurant claiming to have the world's greatest hamburger would be experiencing so much difficulty. So do you think it's sufficient to save them and keep them viable? Or do you even agree that it is, in fact, the world's greatest hamburger? And if it's not Fuddruckers serving it, then who is? And any other thoughts you have about Fuddruckers or any of the other topics I discussed in this video, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear your perspective. Thank you for watching.